You emerge from your leathery shell in complete darkness, buried 2 feet underground in a burrow along the riverbank. Your mother dug this tunnel months ago, carving it deep into the muddy earth where the water meets the land. The walls press close around you, damp and cool, smelling of wet soil and decaying leaves. You're not alone down here. Your sibling hatches just moments after you, both of you breaking free from eggs that look more like reptile shells than anything a mammal should produce. But then again, you're not like other mammals. Your first breath of air tastes stale and humid. Above you, somewhere beyond the ceiling of packed earth, the world continues without knowing you exist, but you're not ready for that world yet. Down here in the nursery burrow, you're safe from the hawks that patrol the skies and the snakes that hunt along the water's edge. Your mother knew what she was doing when she chose this spot. The tunnel slopes gently upward from the river, high enough to avoid flooding, but close enough to the water that she can slip in and out without being noticed. You're tiny, about the size of a grape, and completely helpless. Your eyes are sealed shut, your ears are just slits in your head, and your famous bill is nothing more than a soft, rubbery bump. You look more like a hairless rodent than the creature you'll eventually become. But you're hungry, and that's the one instinct that works perfectly from the moment you hatch. Your mother returns to the burrow, her wet fur dripping as she squeezes through the narrow entrance. She's been gone for hours, hunting in the river while you and your sibling waited in the darkness. She settles beside you, and you instinctively nuzzle against her warm belly. But here's where things get weird, even for a creature as strange as you. Your mother doesn't have nipples. Instead, milk seeps through pores in her skin, pooling in grooves along her belly. You lap it up eagerly, the rich liquid providing everything you need to grow. This goes on for weeks. Your mother leaves at dawn, spends the day hunting underwater, and returns to feed you. The burrow becomes your entire universe, a cramped space that smells increasingly of you and your sibling. You grow fast, doubling in size every few days. Your eyes finally open, revealing a world of brown earth and dim light filtering down from the tunnel entrance. Your bill starts to harden, developing the sensitive nerve endings that will one day help you hunt. Your webbed feet strengthen, and tiny claws emerge from your toes. But the most remarkable change is your fur. What started as bare pink skin slowly sprouts a dense coat of dark brown hair. It's not ordinary fur, though. Each strand is hollow, trapping air bubbles that will keep you warm in cold water. The outer layer repels moisture, while the undercoat provides insulation. You're being equipped for a life spent half in water and half on land, though you don't know it yet. Your sibling is growing just as fast, and the burrow is getting crowded. Sometimes you wrestle, testing your strength against each other in the confined space. These aren't serious fights, just playful tumbling that helps develop your muscles and coordination. You're learning to use your tail as a rudder, even though there's barely room to move it. Your bills bump together as you explore each other's faces, practicing the delicate touch you'll need to hunt. Then comes the day your mother doesn't return at her usual time. Hours pass, and you and your sibling huddle together, listening to the sounds from above. Water trickles down the tunnel walls, carrying the scent of rain and wet leaves. Your stomach growls, but there's nothing you can do except wait. When she finally arrives, she's different. She doesn't settle in for a feeding session like usual. Instead, she paces the small chamber, restless and agitated. She's preparing to wean you, though you don't understand what that means. For the past few weeks, her milk has been changing, becoming less nutritious and harder to find. Your body is ready for solid food, but your instincts haven't caught up yet. You keep trying to nurse, but she gently pushes you away with her bill. It's frustrating and confusing, but it's necessary. You need to learn to hunt, and that can't happen while you're still dependent on her milk. Over the next few days, she brings you gifts: small freshwater shrimp, their shells still soft from recent molting, tiny fish that fit easily in your mouth, aquatic worms that writhe between your teeth. At first, you don't know what to do with them. You poke at the shrimp with your bill, trying to figure out if it's food or toy. Your sibling is just as confused, nudging a dead fish around the burrow floor like it's a strange puzzle. But hunger is a powerful teacher. Eventually, you bite down on one of the shrimp, and the burst of flavor tells you everything you need to know. It's salty and sweet, nothing like your mother's milk, but satisfying in a completely different way. You devour the rest of the shrimp, crunching through the shell with surprising ease. Your sibling follows your lead, and soon you're both tearing into your mother's offerings with enthusiasm. Your mother watches this progress with what might be satisfaction, though it's hard to read emotion in her small, dark eyes. She stays in the burrow less and less, sometimes disappearing for an entire day. When she does return, she brings fewer gifts and spends less time grooming you. The message is clear: you're on your own soon. One morning, you wake up alone. Your mother left during the night and hasn't returned. Your sibling stirs beside you, equally confused by her absence. Hours pass, then a full day. Your stomach aches with hunger, but the burrow is empty except for a few leftover shrimp shells. You've eaten everything edible down here, including some questionable bits of organic matter that wick down from above. That's when you notice the light. Real light, not the dim glow you're used to, but actual sunlight streaming down from the tunnel entrance. Your mother has been coming and going through that opening for your entire life, but you've never seriously considered following her. Now, with hunger gnawing at your belly, it seems like the only option. You and your sibling approach the tunnel mouth cautiously. The opening is just wide enough for your mother's body, which means it's spacious enough for both of you. The scent of fresh air and running water drifts down, mixed with unfamiliar smells that make your nostrils twitch. Somewhere up there is food, but also danger. Everything your instincts tell you about the outside world comes with warnings. Your sibling goes first, scrambling up the sloping tunnel with surprising agility. You follow close behind, your claws finding purchase in the packed earth. The tunnel isn't long, maybe 6 feet from your nursery chamber to the surface, but it feels like climbing a mountain. Every few inches brings new scents and sounds: birds calling from the trees above, water lapping against the bank, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then you emerge into a world so bright and vast that you immediately want to retreat back underground. The sun blazes overhead, forcing you to squint your newly opened eyes. The river stretches out in front of you, wider than you imagined, its surface rippling with currents you can't understand yet. Trees tower along the opposite bank, their canopies alive with movement and sound. But what strikes you most is the sheer size of everything. Your burrow was small and contained, every surface within reach. Out here, the world extends beyond your vision in every direction. The sky alone is bigger than your entire previous existence. It's overwhelming and terrifying, and absolutely fascinating all at once. Your sibling has already moved toward the water's edge, drawn by instincts older than conscious thought. You follow, staying low against the muddy bank. Your webbed feet sink slightly into the soft earth, providing better traction than you expected. The closer you get to the water, the stronger the scents become. Fish, aquatic insects, algae, and dozens of other smells you can't identify yet. The water itself is murky brown, stained with runoff from recent rains. You can't see more than a few inches below the surface, but your bill tingles with electricity. Those nerve endings your mother passed down to you are already picking up the bioelectric fields of living creatures moving underwater. It's like having a sixth sense, one that tells you exactly where to find your next meal. Your sibling takes the plunge first, slipping into the water with barely a splash. The current catches them immediately, but their instincts kick in. Their tail becomes a rudder, their webbed feet become paddles, and suddenly they're swimming like they've been doing it their whole life. You watch from the bank, torn between following and staying safe on dry land. Hunger wins. You slide into the water, and the cold hits you like a shock. But your dense fur keeps you warm, and your body knows exactly what to do. You close your eyes and nostrils, sealing them against the water. Your bill becomes your primary sense organ, sweeping back and forth as you search for prey. Within seconds, you detect movement in the mud below. Your first hunt is clumsy but successful. You dive toward the bottom, your bill probing the sediment until you find a small crayfish hiding under a rock. It tries to escape, but you're faster. Your bill clamps down on its body, and you surface with your prize. The crayfish is still struggling when you swallow it whole, but the satisfactions of catching your own food is unlike anything you've experienced. This is what you were made for, not the cramped darkness of the burrow, but this intersection of land and water where few other creatures can thrive. Your mother knew this day would come when she first dug the nursery tunnel. She gave you everything you needed to survive: the tools to hunt, the instincts to swim, and the courage to leave safety behind. But survival in the wild requires more than just catching food. As you and your sibling paddle near the bank, a shadow passes overhead. You look up to see a large bird circling above, its keen eyes scanning the water. It's hunting too, and you're exactly the right size to make a satisfying meal. Your mother isn't here to protect you anymore. You dive instinctively, using skills you didn't know you had. The water closes over your head, muffling the sounds of the world above. Down here in the murky depths, you're nearly invisible to aerial predators. You can hold your breath for several minutes, long enough for the bird to lose interest and move on. When you surface, the sky is clear again, but the lesson is learned. The world outside your burrow is full of creatures that see you as food, just as you see the crayfish and shrimp as food. The difference is that you're smarter than your prey, and hopefully smart enough to avoid becoming prey yourself. Your sibling has learned the same lesson, surfacing nearby with wide, alert eyes. Together, you begin to understand the rules of your new world. Hunt during the day when your electroreception works best. Stay near the bank where you can escape quickly to land or water. Watch the sky constantly. Trust your instincts, because they've been refined by millions of years of evolution. The sun is setting now, painting the water gold and orange. Your first day in the outside world is ending, and you've survived it. You've caught food, avoided predators, and learned to swim. But where will you sleep tonight? Your mother's burrow is still there, still safe, but something has changed. When you try to return to the familiar tunnel, it feels different somehow, smaller, more confining. You've tasted freedom now, felt the rush of hunting in open water, and the cramped nursery chamber doesn't feel like home anymore. It feels like a cage, but you're not ready to abandon shelter completely. You and your siblings spend the night huddled together at the burrow entrance, close enough to dive back underground if danger approaches, but positioned to escape quickly to the water if needed. It's a compromise between safety and independence, and it works for now. Over the next few days, you develop a routine. Dawn brings the first hunting session when the water is calm and fish are most active. You've gotten better at reading the electrical signals that pulse through the murky river. Every living creature generates its own bioelectric field. Fish have strong, steady pulses, while invertebrates create weaker, more erratic signals. You're learning to distinguish between them, to know which signals mean easy prey and which ones indicate something too big or too dangerous to tackle. Your hunting technique improves with practice. You dive to the bottom and sweep your bill back and forth through the mud like a metal detector searching for treasure. When you find something promising, you dig it out with your claws and examine it with your bill. The nerve endings are so sensitive that you can identify exactly what you've caught without even seeing it. Crayfish feel different from freshwater mussels. Insect larvae have their own distinct electrical signature. Even dead organic matter has a recognizable pattern. But it's not just about finding food, it's about finding enough food. Your body is growing rapidly, and you need to consume almost half your body weight every day just to keep up with your metabolism. That means spending most of your waking hours either hunting or eating. There's no time for play anymore, no leisurely moments basking in the sun. Survival is a full-time job. Your sibling is facing the same challenge, and competition between you is inevitable. When you both detect the same crayfish hiding under a log, there's no sharing. You scramble through the mud, webbed feet kicking up clouds of sediment as you race to reach it first. Your sibling is faster this time, snatching the prize while you're left with nothing but muddy water and disappointment. This rivalry pushes both of you to become better hunters. You learn to search in different areas to avoid competing for the same resources. Your sibling prefers the deeper pools where larger fish hide among the roots of overhanging trees. You gravitate toward the shallows where insects and small crustaceans are more abundant. It's not a conscious decision, just your natural tendencies guiding you toward slightly different ecological niches. The separation becomes more pronounced each day. You find yourself venturing further from the burrow, exploring sections of river that your sibling never visits. The water changes character as you move downstream. Faster currents carry different types of prey. Rocky bottoms hide different species than muddy flats. Each new environment teaches you something about the complexity of your aquatic world. Then one morning, you wake up alone. Your sibling left during the night, following their own path to independence. You search the immediate area, calling out with soft, chittering sounds. But there's no response. They're gone, pursuing their own survival somewhere else along the river system. The realization hits you like cold water. You're truly on your own now. The loneliness is overwhelming at first. For your entire life, you've shared space with others. First your mother, then your sibling. The silence of being alone feels unnatural, even dangerous. Who will watch for predators while you're hunting? Who will help you identify new threats or opportunities? The river suddenly seems much larger and more intimidating when you're the only one navigating it. But loneliness also brings focus. Without the distraction of competition or companionship, you can concentrate entirely on perfecting your survival skills. You spend longer periods underwater, building up your lung capacity and learning to hold your breath for up to 10 minutes. Your electroreception becomes more refined as you learn to filter out background electrical noise and focus on the specific signals that indicate prey. You discover that hunting is most productive in the early morning and late afternoon when aquatic invertebrates are most active. During the heat of midday, you rest in the shade of overhanging vegetation, grooming your fur and processing the morning's catch. Your digestive system is surprisingly efficient. You can extract nutrients from almost anything organic, from fresh fish to decaying plant matter. Your territory expands gradually as you gain confidence. What started as a few hundred yards of familiar riverbank grows into a home range covering several miles of waterway. You learn every rock, every fallen log, every promising hunting spot along your stretch of river. You know where the water runs deep and where it's shallow, where the current is strong and where it forms quiet eddies perfect for hunting. But expanding your territory brings new challenges. Other platypuses live along this river system, adults who've been here much longer than you. They've already claimed the best hunting spots, the safest burrows, the most productive stretches of water. When you accidentally wander into another platypus's territory, the message is clear and immediate. The adult male who confronts you is twice your size, his spurs gleaming with fresh venom. He doesn't attack immediately. That would be wasteful and dangerous for both of you. Instead, he displays his dominance through body language and scent marking. He swims in tight circles around you, his tail creating aggressive splashes. He rubs his scent glands against nearby rocks, leaving chemical messages that clearly state his ownership of this area. You understand the warning and retreat quickly upstream. There's no point in fighting a battle you can't win. But the encounter teaches you an important lesson about platypus society. Adults are solitary and territorial, tolerating no trespassers in their claimed areas. If you want to establish your own territory, you'll need to find unclaimed water or wait for an opening when an older platypus dies or moves on. For now, you settle into a marginal area where two adult territories meet. It's not the best hunting ground. The water is shallower and the prey less abundant, but it's uncontested. You can hunt here without worrying about aggressive encounters with larger platypuses. It's a safe space where you can continue growing and learning. Your first winter approaches with subtle signs. The water temperature drops gradually, and the types of prey begin to change. Some species of aquatic insects enter dormancy, while others become more active as they prepare for their own winter survival strategies. You adapt your hunting techniques accordingly, learning to find the hibernating larvae buried deep in the mud and targeting the species that remain active in cold water. Food becomes scarcer as winter progresses, but your body compensates by becoming more efficient. Your metabolism slows slightly, and you develop a thicker layer of fat beneath your fur. You don't hibernate like some mammals. You remain active throughout the winter, but you do become less energetic, spending more time resting and less time actively hunting. The cold also brings advantages. Fewer predators are active during winter months, giving you more freedom to explore and hunt without constantly watching the sky for hawks or scanning the banks for snakes. The river is quieter, more peaceful, with less competition from other wildlife for the available resources. You use this quieter period to perfect your most challenging skill, burrow construction. You've been sleeping in your mother's old tunnel since becoming independent, but it's time to build your own shelter. The process is more complex than you initially realized. The entrance must be hidden below the waterline to avoid detection by land predators, but the tunnel must slope upward to prevent flooding. The sleeping chamber needs to be large enough for comfort, but small enough to retain body heat. Your first attempt is a disaster. You choose a bank that looks stable, but turns out to be mostly loose sand. The tunnel collapses before you've dug more than a few feet, nearly trapping you in the process. Your second attempt is more successful, but you miscalculate the angle and end up with a chamber that floods during the first heavy rain. Trial and error slowly teach you the engineering principles that your species has been using for millions of years. The ideal burrow site has firm clay soil that holds its shape when excavated. The entrance should be positioned where the current won't wash sediment into the tunnel. The chamber should be lined with dry grass and leaves to provide insulation and comfort. Building your own burrow is exhausting work that takes several weeks to complete. You can only dig for short periods before your claws become sore and your muscles ache from the repetitive motion. But when you finally curl up in your own sleeping chamber for the first time, the satisfaction is immense. This is your space, built by your own effort, perfectly sized for your body, and positioned exactly where you want it. The burrow becomes your fortress against the world. During storms, you retreat deep underground where the thunder can't reach you. When large predators patrol the riverbank above, you remain safely hidden below. The narrow entrance tunnel is too small for most threats to follow, giving you a secure refuge whenever you need it. But the burrow is more than just shelter. It's a sign of your growing maturity. You're no longer the helpless hatchling who depended on your mother for everything. You're not even the inexperienced juvenile who struggled to catch your first crayfish. You're becoming a fully functional adult platypus, capable of thriving in one of the world's most challenging environments. Your electroreception has developed to the point where you can detect prey from impressive distances. You can distinguish between the bioelectric signature of a healthy fish and an injured one, between a large crayfish and a small one, between something worth pursuing and something you should ignore. Your hunting success rate approaches that of experienced adults, and your territory gradually expands as you grow more confident in your abilities. The seasonal cycle continues, bringing new challenges and opportunities with each change. Spring floods wash new nutrients into your section of river, attracting different types of prey. Summer heat concentrates fish in the deeper pools, making them easier to locate but harder to catch. Autumn brings migrating species that pass through your territory, offering brief opportunities for exceptional meals. Through it all, you adapt and learn, becoming more sophisticated in your understanding of the river ecosystem. You know which weather patterns bring the best hunting conditions, which times of day are most productive, which areas to avoid during different seasons. The knowledge accumulates slowly, built from thousands of small observations and experiences. You're no longer just surviving in this environment, you're beginning to master it. Your mastery grows with each passing season, but the river has more lessons to teach. During your second year, you encounter something that changes everything: a female platypus swimming through your territory. She's older than you, more experienced, and completely uninterested in your presence. When you approach, she dives and disappears into the murky water, leaving you confused and strangely agitated. This is your first real encounter with mating instincts, though you won't understand what they mean for months. The female was just passing through, following her own migration route to better hunting grounds. But her scent lingers in the water for days, triggering responses in your brain that you don't recognize. You find yourself swimming in wider patterns, covering more territory, as if searching for something you can't name. Your body is changing in subtle ways that you don't notice at first. Your spurs are growing longer and developing venom glands that will eventually make you dangerous to other males. Your scent glands are becoming more active, producing chemical signals that mark your territory with increasing intensity. You're maturing into a breeding adult, though the process takes years to complete. The transformation brings new challenges. Other young males in the area are going through the same changes, and territorial disputes become more frequent and intense. What used to be simple warnings now escalate into actual fights. You find yourself locked in underwater wrestling matches with rivals, each of you trying to establish dominance over prime hunting areas. Your first serious fight happens during a particularly dry summer when food is scarce and competition is fierce. Another male, slightly larger than you, decides to challenge your claim to a productive bend in the river. He doesn't just swim through your territory, he actively hunts there, taking prey that you consider yours by right of occupation. The confrontation begins with posturing. You swim aggressive circles around each other, tails slapping the water surface in displays of strength. Your spurs extend slightly, not yet fully weaponized but showing their potential. The other male responds with his own threat display, and you realize this won't be resolved without violence. The fight itself is brutal and exhausting. Platypus combat happens mostly underwater, where neither of you can see clearly, and every movement is slowed by water resistance. You grapple with webbed feet and bills, trying to gain leverage while avoiding each other's increasingly dangerous spurs. The battle churns up clouds of mud that make visibility even worse. Victory comes through endurance rather than a decisive blow. Your opponent, slightly older but less familiar with this particular stretch of river, makes a tactical error. He surfaces for air in a shallow area where you have the advantage of better footing. You press your attack, forcing him to retreat toward deeper water, where he eventually gives up and flees downstream. You're left battered and exhausted, but your territory is secure. The victory establishes your reputation among the local platypus population. Other males learn to respect your boundaries, and you settle into a period of relative peace. Your hunting grounds remain productive, and you continue growing in size and experience. But territorial success brings unexpected isolation. Adult platypuses are solitary by nature, and maintaining your territory means driving away the only members of your species you encounter. Days pass without seeing another platypus, weeks without any social interaction beyond brief, hostile encounters. The loneliness is profound, unlike anything you experienced as a juvenile. You fill the empty hours with exploration and hunting, pushing the boundaries of your known world. Upstream from your established territory, the river changes characters dramatically. The water runs faster over rocky bottoms, creating rapids that challenge your swimming abilities. Different prey species live in these turbulent waters: fish adapted to strong currents, insects that cling to rocks in the rushing flow. Learning to hunt in rapids requires new techniques. Your electroreception works differently in moving water, with electrical signals distorted by the current. You have to position yourself carefully, using eddies and calm spots to detect prey before darting into the flow to catch it. It's dangerous work. One mistake could sweep you downstream into unknown territory or dash you against the rocks, but the risks are worth it. The prey in fast water tends to be larger and more nutritious than what you find in the quiet pools of your home territory. A single successful hunt in the rapids can provide more food than an entire day of foraging in familiar areas. You begin making regular expeditions upstream, always returning to your established burrow, but gradually expanding your effective hunting range. These explorations teach you about the larger ecosystem you inhabit. The river isn't just a single waterway. It's part of a vast network of streams, tributaries, and wetlands that support countless species. You discover side channels that flood during heavy rains, creating temporary hunting grounds rich with stranded fish and aquatic invertebrates. You find permanent billabongs where the water never flows, supporting different communities of prey species. Each new environment requires adaptation. The still water of billabongs demands patience. Prey moves slowly here, and sudden movements scare everything away. Flooding creates opportunities, but also dangers, as familiar landmarks disappear under rushing water and safe burrows become death traps. You learn to read weather patterns, to anticipate when conditions will create good hunting and when they'll force you to take shelter. Your third year brings the most significant change yet, your first real mating season. The transformation that began 2 years ago reaches completion as your venom glands fully develop and your territorial instincts peak. The scent of females in breeding condition triggers powerful urges that override your normal caution and solitary nature. You encounter her during the early winter breeding season when the river runs clear and cold. She's established a temporary territory that overlaps with yours, a bold move that would normally trigger aggressive responses. But her scent tells you she's receptive to mating, and your own body chemistry shifts dramatically in response. The courtship is unlike anything in your previous experience. You swim together in synchronized patterns, your bills touching gently as you explore each other's faces. She's particular about potential mates, testing your fitness through elaborate underwater chases that push your swimming abilities to their limits. You have to prove you're strong enough, fast enough, and skilled enough to be worth her time. The mating itself is brief but intense, taking place in the deeper pools where you're both most comfortable. Afterward, she becomes territorial again, driving you away from her chosen nesting site with surprising aggression. Her message is clear: you've served your purpose, and now she needs space to dig her breeding burrow and lay her eggs. You never see those eggs or the young they produce. Platypus males have no role in raising offspring, and attempting to approach a female's nesting area would be met with fierce resistance. Your genetic contribution to the next generation happens in those few moments of mating, and then you return to your solitary existence. But the experience changes you in ways you don't immediately understand. You've successfully reproduced, fulfilling the primary biological imperative that drives all life. The achievement brings a subtle shift in your behavior. Less desperate territorial defense, more confidence in your movements through the water. You've proven your fitness to survive and reproduce in one of the world's most challenging environments. Your fourth year begins with new challenges as younger males start testing your territorial boundaries. They're hungry for prime hunting grounds and willing to fight for them. Some are easy to discourage with threat displays and scent marking. Others require more serious confrontations, underwater battles that test your experience against their youthful vigor. One challenger proves particularly persistent. He's nearly your size, well-fed and confident, clearly successful in his own territory downstream. But something has driven him to seek new hunting grounds. Perhaps human development has degraded his habitat, or an older, more dominant male has displaced him. Whatever the reason, he's determined to claim part of your river stretch. The conflict escalates over several weeks. He makes increasingly bold incursions into your territory, hunting closer and closer to your main burrow. You respond with aggressive patrols and scent marking, but he ignores the warnings. Finally, you confront him directly in the deep pool that represents the heart of your territory. This fight is different from your earlier battles. Both of you are now fully mature, with developed venom spurs and years of combat experience. The stakes are higher too. The loser won't just retreat. He'll be forced to find entirely new hunting grounds or risk starvation in marginal habitat. The battle is savage and prolonged. You grapple underwater for what feels like hours, each trying to position his spurs for a decisive strike. The venom in your spurs is potent enough to cause excruciating pain in mammals much larger than you. A solid hit could end the fight immediately, but landing that hit requires getting close enough for your opponent to strike back. Victory comes through a combination of experience and desperation. This is your home territory, your life's work, and you fight with the fury of defending everything you've built. Your challenger is strong and skilled, but he's fighting for opportunity while you're fighting for survival. In the end, that difference proves decisive. The defeated male retreats downstream, bloodied but alive. You don't pursue, you've made your point, and unnecessary violence serves no purpose, but the victory comes at a cost. You're injured too, with deep gouges from his claws and a painful wound from a glancing blow from his spur. Recovery takes weeks, during which your hunting efficiency drops and you lose weight. The experience teaches you about the true cost of territorial defense. Each successful challenge makes you stronger and more confident, but it also takes a physical toll that accumulates over time. You're beginning to understand why older platypuses eventually lose their territories to younger rivals. It's not just about declining strength, but about the cumulative damage of years of fighting. Your injuries heal, but they leave you more cautious about direct confrontations. You invest more time in scent marking and territorial displays, trying to discourage challenges before they escalate to violence. The strategy works with most potential rivals, but you know that someday you'll face an opponent who can't be deterred by threats alone. Meanwhile, your hunting skills continue to evolve. You've learned to read the river's moods with extraordinary precision, knowing exactly where to hunt based on weather, season, water temperature, and dozens of other variables. Your electroreception has become so sensitive that you can detect prey buried deep in mud or hidden in vegetation from remarkable distances. You discover new prey species regularly, expanding your diet beyond the basic crayfish and insect larvae that sustained you as a juvenile. Small fish become a regular part of your meals, caught with lightning-fast strikes that give them no chance to escape. You learn to crack open freshwater mussels, using your bill like a tool to pry apart their shells. Even tough-shelled beetles succumb to your increasingly powerful jaw muscles. But perhaps your greatest achievement is learning to hunt the river's most elusive prey, the large, bottom-dwelling fish that hide in the deepest pools during daylight hours. These fish are too big and strong for your usual hunting techniques. Catching them requires patience, strategy, and perfect timing. You develop a technique of lying motionless on the bottom, allowing silt to settle on your fur until you're nearly invisible. When a large fish ventures close enough, you explode into action using every bit of speed and power you possess. Success rates are low, maybe one attempt in 10 results in a catch, but a single large fish provides more nutrition than dozens of smaller prey items. These challenging hunts become a source of pride and satisfaction that goes beyond mere survival. You're not just feeding yourself anymore, you're mastering your environment, pushing the boundaries of what's possible for a platypus in these waters. Each successful hunt against difficult prey reinforces your status as an apex predator in your aquatic ecosystem. Your territory continues to evolve as you learn to manage its resources more efficiently. You identify the most productive hunting areas and time your visits to maximize prey availability. You discover that certain sections recover faster after intensive hunting, while others need longer rest periods. This knowledge allows you to sustain higher prey densities throughout your territory. You also learn to read the subtle signs that indicate environmental changes, shifts in water chemistry that might affect prey behavior, changes in vegetation that could alter the ecosystem balance, even human activities upstream that might impact water quality or flow patterns. This awareness helps you adapt your hunting strategies before changes become critical. The river ecosystem itself responds to your presence. Your hunting pressure shapes prey populations, favoring species that can avoid detection or reproduce quickly. Your burrowing activities create habitat for other species. Small fish use your abandoned tunnels as shelters, while aquatic invertebrates colonize the disturbed sediment around your digging sites. You're not just surviving in this environment, you're actively shaping it. Your fifth year brings subtle signs of physical maturity. Your growth rate slows as you approach your adult size. Your fur develops the rich, lustrous quality of a prime adult. Your swimming becomes even more efficient as your body proportions optimize for aquatic life. You're entering your prime years, the period when you'll be at peak physical condition and territorial dominance. But with maturity comes new awareness of mortality. You've seen other platypuses disappear from the river system, their territories suddenly vacant and available for colonization by younger animals. Some simply moved to better habitat, but others clearly died, victims of disease, injury, predation, or old age. The river doesn't mourn its losses, it simply moves on, with new life filling every available niche. You begin to understand your place in this larger pattern. You're not just an individual fighting for survival, you're part of an ongoing cycle of life and death that has continued for millions of years. Your species has survived ice ages, climate changes, continental drift, and countless other challenges by adapting and persisting. You carry that evolutionary legacy in every cell of your body. This understanding doesn't make you fatalistic, but it does add perspective to your daily struggles. Each successful hunt, each territorial victory, each mating opportunity contributes to the continuation of your species. Your individual survival matters, but it's part of something much larger than yourself. The knowledge drives you to make the most of your prime years, to push your abilities to their absolute limits while you still can. Your fifth year also marks your first encounter with something that will define the rest of your life: human interference. The river has always carried strange scents from upstream, chemical traces that don't belong in natural water. But now those scents are stronger, accompanied by unfamiliar sounds that echo through the valley during daylight hours. You first notice the changes in your prey populations. The large bottom-dwelling fish that provided your most challenging and rewarding hunts begin to disappear. Their electrical signatures fade from your favorite deep pools, leaving behind empty spaces that feel wrong somehow. The crayfish populations shift too, with some species thriving while others vanish completely. The water itself tastes different, not obviously poisoned, but carrying flavors that make your sensitive bill recoil. Agricultural runoff from cleared land upstream brings fertilizers and pesticides that alter the entire aquatic ecosystem. The changes are subtle at first, but they accelerate as human development encroaches further into your watershed. You adapt because that's what platypuses do. When the large fish disappear, you focus more on invertebrates. When familiar prey species decline, you learn to exploit the ones that benefit from the changing conditions. Your diet shifts toward more opportunistic feeding, taking advantage of whatever the altered ecosystem provides. But adaptation has limits. The chemicals in the water begin affecting your nervous system in ways you can't understand. Your electroreception becomes less precise, making hunting more difficult and time-consuming. Your energy levels fluctuate unpredictably, leaving you exhausted after hunts that should be routine. Something fundamental is changing in your body's chemistry. The breeding season arrives with mixed results. You encounter fewer females than in previous years, and those you do find seem less healthy than before. Mating occurs, but you sense something different in the female's behavior. They're more aggressive, more territorial, as if resources are becoming scarce enough to trigger defensive responses, even during courtship. You never learn what happens to the eggs from these matings. Female platypuses dig their breeding burrows in riverbank locations that are increasingly disturbed by human activity. Some traditional nesting sites have been destroyed entirely, forcing females to choose marginal locations that may flood or collapse. The reproductive success of your species in this watershed is declining, though you have no way to understand the broader implications. Your territory faces new pressures as well. Other adult males, displaced from degraded habitat upstream, begin challenging your boundaries more frequently. These aren't the normal territorial disputes between healthy animals competing for prime resources. These are desperate battles fought by stressed animals whose own habitats have become uninhabitable. One challenger arrives in particularly poor condition. His fur lacks the glossy sheen of good health, and his movements seem sluggish despite his obvious desperation. When you confront him in your usual territorial display, he doesn't respond with normal threat postures. Instead, he attacks immediately, fighting with the reckless fury of an animal that has nothing left to lose. The battle is vicious and prolonged. Your opponent's poor condition should make him easy to defeat, but his desperation makes him unpredictable and dangerous. He takes risks that no healthy animal would consider, exposing himself to your venomous spurs while trying to inflict maximum damage with his own weapons. You win, but the victory feels hollow. The defeated male retreats downstream, clearly dying from a combination of your venom and his own poor health. Within days, you find his body floating in a quiet backwater, another casualty of the changing river system. His death serves as a grim reminder of what awaits animals that can't adapt to human-altered environments. The loss of habitat quality forces you to expand your hunting range even further. You begin making longer expeditions up tributary streams, searching for the clean water and abundant prey that your main territory once provided. These journeys are risky and exhausting, taking you far from the safety of your established burrow system. During one such expedition, you encounter something that changes your understanding of the world completely. Swimming up a small creek that feeds into your river, you come upon a concrete barrier that blocks the waterway entirely. The structure is massive, clearly built by humans, and it completely prevents fish migration between the upper and lower sections of the creek. Below the barrier, the water runs shallow and warm, depleted of the cool, oxygen-rich flow that once supported diverse aquatic life. Above it, you can sense the electrical signatures of thriving fish populations that can no longer reach the lower creek. The barrier has effectively cut your ecosystem in half, isolating populations and disrupting the natural flow patterns that have sustained life here for millions of years. You spend hours investigating the structure, trying to find a way around or over it. Your bills detect electrical activity in the water above, tantalizingly close, but completely inaccessible. The concrete surface offers no purchase for your claws, and the drop on the downstream side is too steep to climb. You're trapped in the lower section with declining resources, while abundant food waits just out of reach. This encounter with human engineering marks a turning point in your life. For the first time, you face a problem that can't be solved through adaptation or persistence. The barrier represents something beyond your evolutionary experience, a permanent alteration of your environment that no amount of skill or determination can overcome. You return to your main territory, with new understanding of the challenges facing your species. The river system that shaped your evolution and supported your ancestors for millions of years is being transformed by forces beyond your comprehension. Some changes can be adapted to, but others represent fundamental breaks in the ecological relationships that make your existence possible. Your sixth year brings accelerating decline. The chemical contamination in your river reaches levels that affect your basic physiology. Your fur begins losing its waterproofing properties, forcing you to spend more energy maintaining body temperature during hunts. Your digestive system struggles to process prey that carries increasing loads of environmental toxins. Most concerning, your electroreception continues to deteriorate. The nerve endings in your bill that once provided precise information about prey location now deliver confused, contradictory signals. Hunting becomes a matter of guesswork rather than skill, dramatically reducing your success rate and forcing you to spend longer periods underwater, searching for increasingly scarce prey. The territorial battles that once defined your adult life become rare as the overall platypus population in your watershed declines. The few remaining individuals are too scattered and stressed to maintain normal territorial behavior. You encounter other platypuses so infrequently that their scent trails feel like messages from ghosts. Your burrow system, once a difficult to maintain, the riverbank stability source of security and comfort, becomes increasingly that allowed you to dig permanent tunnels, is compromised by erosion from altered water flows. Your main sleeping chamber floods repeatedly during storms, forcing you to excavate new shelters with increasing frequency. The effort required for basic survival leaves little energy for the behaviors that once brought satisfaction and purpose to your life. Complex hunting strategies become impossible when you're struggling to catch enough food to meet basic caloric needs. Territorial defense becomes meaningless when there's barely enough habitat to support a single individual. But perhaps the most profound change is the absence of breeding opportunities. You encounter no receptive females during what should be your prime reproductive years. The few females remaining in the area are focused entirely on survival, their bodies too stressed by environmental toxins to support the energy demands of reproduction. Your seventh year passes in a haze of declining health and diminishing returns from familiar survival strategies. The prey populations that sustained you for years continue to crash as the river ecosystem collapses under the weight of human impacts. Species that survived ice ages and continental drift disappear within a single season, their ecological niches eliminated by chemical contamination and habitat destruction. You adapt by lowering your standards, accepting prey items you would have ignored in healthier times. Diseased fish become acceptable meals when nothing better is available. Invertebrates contaminated with heavy metals provide calories despite their toxic burden. Your body accumulates pollutants with every meal, adding to the chemical load that's already compromising your organ function. The river itself seems to be dying around you. The clear, oxygen-rich water that once supported abundant life gives way to murky flows choked with algae blooms, fed by agricultural runoff. The electrical signatures of living creatures become fainter and more scattered as biodiversity collapses throughout the watershed. Your electroreception, already damaged by toxin exposure, struggles to function in water with altered electrical conductivity. The chemical soup that your river has become interferes with the bioelectric fields you depend on for hunting. You're essentially hunting blind in an environment that no longer supports the prey species your senses evolved to detect. During the 8th year, your body begins failing in ways that go beyond simple aging. Your immune system, compromised by years of toxin exposure, can no longer fight off infections that healthy platypuses would easily overcome. Skin lesions appear along your bill and feet, refusing to heal properly. Your fur develops bald patches where follicles have been damaged by chemical exposure. Your movements become labored and uncoordinated as neurological damage accumulates. The precise swimming motions that once made you a master of your aquatic environment become clumsy and inefficient. Simple tasks like digging burrow repairs require enormous effort and leave you exhausted for hours. The final breeding season of your life arrives without prospects. No females remain in your section of the river, and you lack the energy to search extensively for potential mates. Even if you found a receptive female, your compromised health would make successful reproduction unlikely. Your genetic line, which survived countless environmental challenges over millions of years, ends with you. Your hunting ability deteriorates to the point where starvation becomes a constant threat. Days pass without successful prey capture as your damaged senses fail to locate the few remaining food sources. Your body begins consuming its own muscle tissue to meet basic metabolic needs, further reducing your strength and coordination. The burrow that served as your fortress against the world becomes your final refuge. Too weak to hunt effectively, you spend increasing amounts of time underground, emerging only when hunger drives you to make desperate attempts at finding food. The tunnel system that once represented your mastery of the environment now feels like a tomb you've prepared for yourself. During a particularly cold night in your 9th year, you curl up in your sleeping chamber for the last time. Your body, poisoned by years of chemical exposure and weakened by malnutrition, finally surrenders to the accumulated damage. You die quietly in the darkness, alone and forgotten, another casualty of an ecosystem in collapse. Your death goes unnoticed by the world above. No other platypuses remain in the area to detect your absence. The river continues flowing, carrying its toxic burden toward distant seas. The concrete barriers that blocked fish migration remain in place. The chemical contamination that poisoned your body continues accumulating in the sediments and water. But your story isn't entirely without legacy. Somewhere in the upper reaches of distant watersheds, your species continues to survive in pockets of relatively clean habitat. Female platypuses still dig their breeding burrows in stable riverbanks, their eggs developing in chambers carved from ancient clay. Young platypuses still take their first swimming lessons in clear mountain streams, their electroreception guiding them toward abundant prey. These survivors carry the same genetic heritage that enabled you to thrive for most of your life. They possess the same remarkable adaptations that allowed your ancestors to survive the extinction of dinosaurs and the rise of mammals. Given clean water and intact habitat, they demonstrate the same intelligence, resilience, and ecological mastery that defined your species for 65 million years. Your individual story ends in the poisoned waters of a degraded river system, but the story of your species continues in the places where ancient evolutionary relationships still function, where platypuses can pursue their extraordinary lives as evolution intended. Whether those places will persist long enough for future generations to inherit them remains an open question, one that will be answered by forces far beyond the reach of any individual platypus. In the end, you lived as your ancestors lived, adapting, persisting, making the most of whatever environment you inherited. That you ultimately failed to overcome human-created challenges doesn't diminish the remarkable journey that brought you from a grape-sized hatchling to a master of one of the world's most challenging environments. You were a platypus, and for most of your 9 years, that was enough. The seasons blur together now, each one bringing fewer signs of life than the last. Your ninth year stretches into winter, but the cold feels different this time, deeper, more final. The water temperature drops, but it doesn't matter much because there's so little left to hunt anyway. The few remaining crayfish move sluggishly through water that tastes increasingly of chemicals and decay. Your body has become a collection of failing systems held together by stubborn will. The dense fur that once kept you warm in the coldest water now hangs loose and patchy, offering little protection against the biting cold. Your webbed feet, once perfectly designed for propulsion through water, now struggle to maintain grip on slippery rocks. Every movement requires conscious effort that once happened automatically. The electroreception that defined your hunting prowess has deteriorated to barely functional levels. Where you once detected the precise bioelectric signatures of individual prey items from impressive distances, now you sense only vague electrical noise that might or might not indicate something edible. Your bill, once as sensitive as a sophisticated scientific instrument, has become little more than a crude probe for feeling around in the mud. You spend entire days in your burrow, conserving what little energy remains. The sleeping chamber that once felt perfectly sized for your body now seems too large, unable to retain the heat from your diminished metabolism. You've lined it with every scrap of vegetation you could find, but the insulation feels inadequate against the cold that seems to come from within your own body. When hunger finally drives you from your shelter, the hunting expeditions have become exercises in futility. You dive to familiar spots where prey once congregated, but find only empty mud and the occasional piece of debris washed down from upstream. The electrical signatures you do detect often turn out to be false positives, bits of metal or other conductive materials that your damaged senses mistake for living creatures. Your movements through the water have lost all the grace and efficiency that once made you a perfect aquatic predator. You surface frequently, gasping for air that your compromised lungs struggle to process effectively. The smooth, streamlined swimming that once carried you effortlessly through the strongest currents now requires enormous effort just to move a few meters downstream. The few prey items you do manage to catch provide little nourishment. A sickly crayfish here, a dying fish there, each one carrying its own burden of environmental toxins that add to your body's already overwhelming chemical load. Your digestive system, evolved to extract maximum nutrition from healthy aquatic prey, struggles to process these contaminated meals without making your condition worse. Your territory, once proudly defended against all challengers, has become meaningless. No other platypuses venture into this dead zone anymore, and you lack the strength to patrol boundaries that no longer matter. The scent marks you once maintained so carefully have faded, leaving no trace of your years of dominance in this stretch of water. The river itself seems to mock your condition. During rare moments of clarity, you remember how this waterway once teemed with life. Schools of fish creating complex electrical patterns, crayfish populations so dense that hunting required no skill, insect hatches that darkened the water with abundance. Now the same river runs nearly silent, its bioelectric chorus reduced to scattered, weak signals from the few survivors still clinging to existence. Your final molt approaches, though your body lacks the resources to complete it properly. The process that once marked growth and renewal now becomes a painful struggle against your own physiology. Your old exoskeleton, what little remains intact, refuses to shed cleanly, leaving you partially trapped in dead tissue that your body can't fully discard. The burrow floods again during a winter storm, forcing you to evacuate to higher ground. But your backup shelters have collapsed from neglect and bank erosion, leaving you exposed to the elements for the first time since your earliest juvenile days. You huddle against a fallen log, your inadequate fur providing minimal protection against wind and rain that cuts through you like ice. When the storm passes, you lack the energy to return to your main burrow. The distance that once seemed trivial now appears insurmountable. You remain where you are, pressed against the log, as hours turn into days and your condition continues to deteriorate. Dehydration sets in despite being surrounded by water that your body can no longer safely process. Your vision, never particularly important for a creature that hunts primarily by electroreception, begins to fail as well. The world takes on a hazy, indistinct quality that makes navigation increasingly difficult. You can still sense the general layout of your environment, but the fine details that once guided your movements have disappeared into a gray fog. The cold penetrates deeper with each passing hour. Your metabolic rate, already slowed by malnutrition and toxin damage, drops further as your body attempts to conserve its remaining resources. But there's nothing left to conserve. Years of accumulated damage have pushed your biological systems beyond their ability to function. You try once more to reach the water, driven by instincts that demand you continue hunting despite your condition. But your legs can no longer support your weight on the muddy bank. You slide partway down the slope and come to rest at the water's edge, your bill just touching the surface of the river that shaped your entire existence. The electrical noise in the water feels different now. Not the chaotic interference of a damaged ecosystem, but something more fundamental. Your failing nervous system can no longer distinguish between external electrical fields and the random firing of your own deteriorating neurons. The boundary between your body and the environment begins to dissolve as your sensory systems shut down one by one. Your breathing becomes shallow and irregular. The lungs that once allowed you to hold your breath for 10 minutes underwater now struggle to extract oxygen from the air, even during rest. Each breath requires conscious effort, and the intervals between breaths grow longer as your respiratory system fails. Consciousness flickers like a dying flame. Moments of awareness alternate with periods of darkness as your brain, starved of oxygen and poisoned by accumulated toxins, begins its final shutdown. During the brief periods of clarity, you're dimly aware of lying at the edge of the water that defined your life, but the significance feels distant and abstract. Your heart, having beaten steadily for 9 years through every hunt, every territorial battle, every challenge your environment could present, finally begins to falter. The rhythm becomes irregular, then weak, then barely perceptible. Blood flow to your vital organs drops as your cardiovascular system can no longer maintain the pressure needed to sustain life. The final moments come without drama or struggle. Your body simply stops functioning as the last of your biological systems surrender to the accumulated damage of years in a poisoned environment. Your electroreception, the sense that made you uniquely suited to aquatic hunting, fades to nothing. The bioelectric field generated by your own nervous system diminishes and disappears. You die as the sun sets on your 9th winter, your body coming to rest where the poisoned water laps against the eroded bank. The river continues flowing around you, carrying its toxic burden toward distant seas, indifferent to the passing of another casualty in the ongoing collapse of its ecosystem. Your death marks the end of Platypus' presence in this particular stretch of water. The territory you defended so fiercely for years becomes truly vacant. Its resources, what few remain, available to any creature capable of surviving in such degraded conditions. But few species can adapt to the chemical cocktail that your river has become. Within days, your body begins to decompose, returning its accumulated toxins to the sediment and water column. The heavy metals, pesticides, and industrial chemicals that contributed to your death become part of the river's chemistry, adding to the contamination that will affect future generations of whatever wildlife manages to survive here. The burrow system you excavated over years of patient labor slowly fills with silt and debris. The engineering achievement that once represented your mastery of the riverbank environment disappears as if it never existed. The sleeping chamber where you spent countless hours in safety and comfort becomes indistinguishable from the surrounding clay and sand. No memorial marks your passing. No other members of your species witness your death or mourn your absence. The river ecosystem that your presence once helped shape continues its decline without pause. The complex web of predator-prey relationships that you participated in for nearly a decade unravels further as another key species disappears from the food web. But somewhere in the headwaters of distant rivers, platypus life continues. In streams not yet reached by industrial agriculture and urban development, females still dig their breeding burrows in stable banks. Young platypuses still emerge from their eggs to begin the ancient cycle of growth, learning, and eventual reproduction. The species that produced you survives, though in ever smaller pockets of suitable habitat. These surviving populations carry the same genetic heritage that enabled you to thrive during your early years. They possess the same remarkable electroreception, the same dense waterproof fur, the same unique combination of mammalian, reptilian, and bird-like characteristics that made your species one of evolution's most distinctive achievements. Whether enough suitable habitat will remain for these populations to persist long-term remains uncertain. The forces that destroyed your river system continue to spread across watersheds throughout your species' range. Climate change, habitat destruction, chemical contamination, and water extraction for human use present challenges that no amount of evolutionary adaptation can overcome quickly enough. Your individual story represents both the resilience and vulnerability of your species. For most of your 9 years, you demonstrated the remarkable adaptability that allowed platypuses to survive the extinction of dinosaurs, ice ages, continental drift, and countless other environmental changes over 65 million years of evolutionary history. You mastered one of the world's most challenging environments, becoming a perfect synthesis of aquatic and terrestrial capabilities. You successfully defended territory, reproduced, and passed your genes to the next generation. For the majority of your existence, you embodied everything that made your species successful across geological timescales. That you ultimately succumbed to human-created environmental degradation doesn't diminish these achievements. You faced challenges that your species had never encountered in its entire evolutionary history. Synthetic chemicals that didn't exist until the last century, habitat modifications on scales unprecedented in natural systems, pollution loads that overwhelmed the adaptive capacity of any living creature. Your death in the poisoned waters of a dying river system represents more than just individual mortality. It symbolizes the broader crisis facing unique species worldwide as human activities transform the planet faster than evolution can respond. You were a casualty of the sixth mass extinction, one of millions of individuals whose deaths collectively represent the loss of evolutionary heritage accumulated over hundreds of millions of years. Yet your species' story isn't finished. In the remote headwaters where your ancestors once thrived, the ancient patterns continue, Platypus mothers still nurse their young with milk secreted through pores in their skin. Young platypuses still learn to hunt using bioelectric senses that remain among the most sophisticated in the animal kingdom. The unique combination of traits that defines your species persists in the few places where evolutionary relationships still function as intended. Your legacy lives on in these surviving populations, carrying forward the genetic heritage that shaped your remarkable life. Every successful hunt by a distant relative, every territorial victory by a young male establishing his first territory, every clutch of eggs laid in a secure burrow represents the continuation of the evolutionary experiment that produced you. The story of your species extends far beyond your individual existence, reaching back through geological time to the earliest mammals and forward to whatever future awaits in a rapidly changing world. You played your part in that ongoing story, adapting and persisting for as long as the environment allowed, demonstrating both the incredible resilience and ultimate fragility of life on Earth. In the places where platypuses still thrive, your story continues through others who share your unique heritage, remarkable creatures perfectly adapted to life at the intersection of land and water, carrying forward an evolutionary legacy that predates the rise of most mammalian lineages. Whether that legacy will persist long enough for future generations to inherit depends on choices being made far beyond any platypus burrow in the realm of human decision-making about the kind of world we choose to leave behind. Your 9 years of life, from the first breath in your mother's burrow to your final moments at the water's edge, represent both a complete story and a single chapter in the much larger narrative of your species' existence on this planet. Your story becomes part of something larger now, woven into the countless tales of platypuses who lived and died along these waterways over millions of years. But the river doesn't pause to acknowledge your passing. The current continues its ancient flow, carrying sediment and debris downstream, indifferent to the extinction it has witnessed. Within hours, scavengers begin to investigate your remains. A water rat approaches cautiously, drawn by the scent of death, but wary of predators that might still be lurking nearby. It finds nothing threatening, just the still form of a creature it never truly understood, one whose presence in the river ecosystem it had accepted without question for years. The decomposition process accelerates in the warm, humid environment along the riverbank. Bacteria that had been held in check by your immune system now spread unchallenged through your tissues. Your body, which had been such a perfect synthesis of evolutionary adaptations, begins its return to the basic elements that formed it. Your dense fur, once so perfectly engineered to trap air and repel water, starts to loosen and fall away in patches. The hollow hairs that kept you warm during countless underwater hunts scatter in the wind, some catching on nearby vegetation, others floating downstream to join the river's flow. Each strand carries with it traces of the chemicals that accumulated in your body over years of exposure to contaminated prey. The webbed feet that propelled you through the water with such grace begin to shrivel and decay. The claws that dug your burrows and grasped struggling prey lose their sharp edges as the keratin breaks down. Your tail, which served as both rudder and fat storage, deflates as its contents are consumed by the relentless process of decomposition. But it's the loss of your bill that seems most significant somehow. This remarkable organ, packed with 40,000 nerve endings, capable of detecting the faintest bioelectric signals, becomes just another piece of decaying tissue. The sensory apparatus that made you one of nature's most sophisticated hunters dissolves back into the earth, taking with it all the knowledge and experience you accumulated over 9 years of perfecting your craft. Your skeleton will persist longer than your soft tissues, but even these remnants of your existence will eventually crumble and disappear. The bones that supported your streamlined body, perfectly proportioned for aquatic life, will bleach in the sun and scatter in the next major flood. Future paleontologists, if any exist, might find fragments that hint at your species' presence in this watershed, but they'll never know the individual story of struggle and adaptation that these bones represent. The burrow system you created with such effort begins its own process of decay. Without your constant maintenance, the tunnels start to collapse as groundwater and surface runoff erode their walls. The sleeping chamber where you spent so many hours in safety and comfort fills gradually with sediment and debris. Within a year, no trace of your engineering achievement will remain visible above or below ground. Your territory, once so fiercely defended against all challengers, becomes truly vacant for the first time in years. The boundaries you marked so carefully with scent fade as the chemical signals break down and wash away. The hunting spots you knew so intimately, every rock, every fallen log, every promising patch of mud, lose their significance as the knowledge of their productivity dies with you. The absence creates a strange emptiness in the river's ecology. For nearly a decade, your presence shaped the behavior of countless other species. The crayfish populations in your territory had adapted to your hunting pressure, developing behavioral patterns and population dynamics that took your predation into account. Now, with their primary predator gone, these populations face a period of adjustment to their suddenly altered environment. Small fish that had learned to avoid certain areas during your active hunting periods begin to explore previously dangerous waters. Aquatic insects that had evolved specific behaviors to escape your electroreception no longer face that particular selective pressure. The entire microscopic ecosystem that thrived in the sediments you disturbed during your digging activities must now adapt to a different pattern of disturbance. But these ecological adjustments are minor compared to the broader changes sweeping through the watershed. The same forces that ultimately killed you continue to operate with increasing intensity. More agricultural chemicals wash down from upstream farms with each heavy rain. Additional concrete barriers appear across tributary streams, further fragmenting the remaining aquatic habitat. The water temperature continues to rise as climate change interacts with reduced canopy cover from deforestation. The pH becomes more acidic as atmospheric carbon dioxide dissolves into the increasingly stagnant pools. Oxygen levels drop as decomposing algae blooms consume what little remains of the river's ability to support complex life. Within months of your death, several more species disappear entirely from your former territory. A population of freshwater mussels that had filtered the water for decades succumbs to heavy metal poisoning. The last remaining school of native fish, already reduced to a handful of individuals, fails to reproduce successfully in water too contaminated to support their eggs and larvae. Your river becomes a case study in ecosystem collapse, though no scientists are present to document the process. The transformation from a thriving aquatic ecosystem to a nearly sterile waterway happens with shocking speed once critical thresholds are crossed. Species that survived for millions of years vanish within a single season, their ecological relationships severed beyond any possibility of recovery. The silence grows deeper with each passing month. Where your river once resonated with the bioelectric chatter of countless living creatures, now only occasional signals penetrate the chemical haze. A few hardy species persist in the most polluted sections, invasive fish tolerant of low oxygen, exotic invertebrates that thrive in disturbed conditions, bacteria and algae that feed on the organic compounds washing down from upstream. These survivors create their own simplified ecosystem, one based on very different relationships than the complex web that once included your species. They process the river's energy and nutrients through pathways that would be unrecognizable to the creatures that lived here during your lifetime. The water continues to flow, but it carries life forms that represent an entirely different chapter in the river's biological history. Seasonal cycles continue without the species that once defined them. Spring floods still reshape the channel, but they no longer trigger the migrations and reproduction events that once marked this time of year. Summer low flows still concentrate nutrients in isolated pools, but the creatures that once exploited these temporary resources are gone forever. The first autumn after your death passes without the spawning runs that once brought marine species upstream to reproduce. The winter brings its usual cold temperatures, but there are no longer any warm-blooded creatures diving beneath the ice to hunt in the deeper pools. The river sleeps through its first winter in millions of years without the presence of any mammalian predators. Your species' absence from this watershed represents more than just local extinction. It's part of a pattern repeating itself across your species' entire range as human activities transform aquatic environments faster than evolution can respond. The same story plays out in river after river. Initial stress followed by population decline, then reproductive failure, and finally the death of the last individuals. Some watersheds still support healthy platypus populations, but they become increasingly isolated as development fragments the landscape between them. These remaining strongholds face their own pressures as water extraction for agriculture and urban use reduces flow rates below critical levels. Climate change shifts precipitation patterns, creating droughts in some areas and floods in others, both of which can devastate populations adapted to more predictable conditions. The genetic diversity that once allowed your species to adapt to changing conditions becomes concentrated in smaller and smaller pockets. Inbreeding becomes unavoidable in isolated populations, reducing fertility and increasing susceptibility to disease. The evolutionary flexibility that carried your ancestors through millions of years of environmental change erodes with each generation. Conservation efforts begin in some areas, but they face enormous challenges. Restoring degraded waterways requires addressing pollution sources across entire watersheds, often conflicting with powerful economic interests. Removing the concrete barriers that fragment aquatic habitats demands coordination between multiple government agencies and private landowners. Even successful restoration projects take decades to show results, and many fail due to continued contamination from upstream sources. Captive breeding programs struggle with the unique requirements of your species. Female platypuses are notoriously difficult to breed in artificial environments, and the complex behavioral patterns necessary for successful reproduction are poorly understood. Even when captive breeding succeeds, reintroducing animals to the wild requires suitable habitat that may no longer exist. The few remaining wild populations become increasingly precious as their rarity becomes apparent. Research efforts intensify, but they often arrive too late to document the complex ecological relationships that defined healthy platypus communities. Scientists study the survivors, but they're observing the remnants of something much larger and more complex that has already been largely lost. Educational programs attempt to raise awareness about your species' plight, but they compete with countless other environmental crises for public attention. The unique characteristics that make platypuses so fascinating to biologists, the electroreception, the egg laying, the venomous spurs, become the focus of popular interest, while the habitat requirements necessary for survival receive less attention. Media coverage tends to emphasize the bizarre and unusual aspects of your species rather than the broader ecological issues that threaten its survival. The platypus becomes a mascot for Australian wildlife, appearing on currency and tourist materials, while its actual habitat continues to disappear with little public awareness of the connection between conservation and economic policy. Political responses vary widely across the regions where your species still survives. Some governments implement strict environmental protections, while others prioritize economic development over ecosystem preservation. International cooperation remains limited despite the global nature of the climate and pollution issues that threaten aquatic ecosystems worldwide. The story of your individual life and death becomes part of a larger narrative about the relationship between human civilization and the natural world. Your species' struggle for survival represents one example among thousands of similar stories playing out across the planet as the sixth mass extinction accelerates. But your species also represents something more hopeful: the incredible creativity and resilience of life itself. The evolutionary process that produced platypuses demonstrated nature's ability to solve complex problems through innovative combinations of existing traits. Your ancestors survived the extinction of dinosaurs by adapting to new ecological opportunities, proving that life finds ways to persist even through catastrophic changes. The same evolutionary creativity continues in the places where your species still thrives. Young platypuses still emerge from their burrows to take their first swimming lessons, their nervous systems already wired with the sophisticated sensory capabilities that your species developed over millions of years. Each successful hunt, each territorial establishment, each breeding season represents the continuation of an evolutionary experiment that produced one of the world's most remarkable creatures. The future remains uncertain, but it's not predetermined. Human societies are beginning to recognize the connections between ecosystem health and their own long-term survival. Technologies are being developed that could help restore damaged waterways and reduce the pollution loads that proved fatal to you and countless others. Some watersheds are already showing signs of recovery as conservation efforts take effect. Fish populations rebound when barriers are removed and pollution sources are controlled. Riparian vegetation returns when livestock grazing is managed appropriately. Water quality improves when agricultural practices are modified to reduce chemical runoff. These successful restoration projects provide models for recovering the habitat necessary to support healthy platypus populations. They demonstrate that the environmental degradation that killed you and eliminated your species from this watershed is not irreversible, given sufficient political will and economic commitment. The knowledge gained from studying your species' ecology and behavior continues to inform conservation efforts in the remaining strongholds. Researchers now understand the importance of maintaining natural flow regimes, preserving riparian vegetation, and controlling pollution sources at the watershed scale. This knowledge, purchased at the cost of countless individual deaths like yours, could help prevent future extinctions if it's applied quickly enough. Your death was not meaningless if it contributes to broader understanding of what's required to maintain healthy aquatic ecosystems. The poisoned river where you spent your final years serves as a warning about what happens when human activities exceed the carrying capacity of natural systems. The silence that followed your passing demonstrates the ecological consequences of treating waterways as waste disposal systems rather than living communities. The children of your species, who still swim in cleaner waters, carry forward the genetic heritage that shaped your remarkable life. In their bills are the same 40,000 nerve endings that once guided your hunting. In their dense fur are the same hollow hairs that kept you warm during countless underwater expeditions. In their behavior are the same instincts that helped you master one of the world's most challenging environments. They face the same daily challenges that defined your existence: finding food, avoiding predators, defending territory, reproducing successfully. But they do so in waters still capable of supporting the complex ecological relationships that make their lives possible. Their successes and failures will determine whether your species' extraordinary evolutionary story continues or ends with the current generation. The river where you died continues its flow toward the sea, carrying its burden of chemicals and debris past landscapes increasingly dominated by human infrastructure. But other rivers still run clear and cold from mountain sources, their waters supporting the aquatic communities that sustained your ancestors for millions of years. In these surviving habitats, the ancient patterns persist. Female platypuses still dig their breeding burrows in stable banks. Males still defend territories with fierce determination. Young platypuses still learn to hunt using senses that remain among the most sophisticated in the animal kingdom. Your individual story ends in the poisoned shallows of a dying river system, but the story of your species continues wherever suitable habitat remains. Whether enough such habitat will survive the current century to support viable populations long-term depends on choices being made in boardrooms and legislative chambers far from any platypus burrow. The legacy of your 9-year struggle for survival becomes part of the evidence that life on Earth stands at a crossroads. The same intelligence that produced the technologies threatening your species' existence could also develop the solutions necessary to prevent its extinction. The same economic systems that prioritized short-term profits over ecosystem health could be redesigned to recognize the true value of biodiversity and environmental stability. Your death in the contaminated waters of a degraded river system represents both an ending and a beginning. It marks the end of platypus presence in one more watershed, but it also contributes to the growing awareness that current patterns of environmental destruction are unsustainable. The silence that followed your passing adds to the growing chorus of evidence that business as usual will lead to ecological collapse on a planetary scale. But awareness alone is not enough. The fate of your species now depends on whether human societies can translate their growing understanding of environmental crisis into effective action quickly enough to preserve the remaining habitat necessary for survival. In the places where your species still persists, each day brings new challenges and new opportunities. Young platypuses continue to emerge from their burrows, ready to begin the ancient cycle of growth, learning, and eventual reproduction. Their success or failure will determine whether your remarkable species survives to see the 22nd century. The story continues, though its outcome remains unwritten. Your species persists in scattered pockets across the continent, but each population faces mounting pressures that your ancestors never encountered. In the Murray-Darling Basin, where some of the largest remaining populations struggle to survive, water extraction for irrigation has reduced river flows to critical levels. During drought years, entire sections of once reliable waterways dry up completely, forcing platypuses to abandon territories their families may have occupied for generations. The surviving populations adapt where they can. Some learn to exploit urban waterways, hunting in stormwater channels, and constructed wetlands that provide marginal habitat. These city-dwelling platypuses face different challenges: higher pollution loads from road runoff, unpredictable water levels controlled by human infrastructure, and constant disturbance from recreational activities. Research stations monitor the remaining strongholds, tracking population numbers that decline with each annual survey. Scientists attach tiny radio transmitters to captured individuals, following their movements as territories shrink and hunting success rates drop. The data paints a grim picture of species in retreat, but it also reveals remarkable resilience in the survivors. One monitored female, designated F23 by researchers, successfully raises 3 clutches of young despite living in a river system where agricultural runoff has eliminated most large prey species. She adapts by teaching her offspring to hunt smaller prey items that previous generations might have ignored. Her hunting patterns shift toward dawn and dusk when aquatic invertebrates show increased activity in the warming water. Her success inspires hope among conservationists, but it also highlights how much the species has already lost. FU-23's territory covers twice the area that would have supported a platypus 50 years ago, and her reproductive success rate is half what researchers consider normal for healthy populations. She's surviving, but barely, in an environment that once supported dozens of individuals. The genetic analysis of surviving populations reveals concerning trends. Isolated groups show signs of inbreeding that reduce fertility and increase susceptibility to disease. Some populations have lost genetic variants that may have provided resistance to environmental toxins or adaptation to climate change. The evolutionary flexibility that carried your ancestors through millions of years of environmental challenges is eroding with each generation. Climate projections suggest even greater challenges ahead. Rising temperatures will stress cold water species throughout your range. Increased frequency of extreme weather events will disrupt the stable flow regimes that platypuses require for successful reproduction. Ocean acidification will affect the coastal estuaries where some populations hunt during winter months. But human responses to these challenges are beginning to accelerate. River restoration projects remove obsolete dams and install fish ladders that allow movement between previously isolated habitat fragments. Urban planning increasingly incorporates green infrastructure that provides wildlife corridors through developed landscapes. Agricultural practices slowly shift toward methods that reduce chemical runoff and preserve riparian vegetation. Some restoration efforts specifically target platypus habitat requirements. Artificial nesting banks, constructed with appropriate soil composition, provide breeding sites where natural banks have been destroyed by erosion. Fish restocking programs reintroduce native species that once formed the backbone of platypus diets. Water release schedules from reservoirs attempt to mimic natural flow patterns that trigger reproductive behaviors. The most ambitious projects aim to restore entire watershed systems, addressing pollution sources from headwaters to river mouths. These landscape-scale efforts require coordination between multiple government agencies, private landowners, indigenous communities, and conservation organizations. Progress is slow and often frustrated by competing economic interests, but successful examples provide models for broader application. Educational programs begin reaching school children who may never see a living platypus but learn to understand their role in maintaining healthy aquatic ecosystems. Citizen science projects engage volunteers in monitoring water quality and reporting platypus sightings. Social media campaigns raise awareness about the connections between individual consumer choices and watershed health. Indigenous knowledge systems, long ignored by mainstream conservation efforts, offer insights into traditional management practices that sustained platypus populations for thousands of years. Aboriginal communities share their understanding of seasonal patterns, habitat requirements, and ecological relationships that scientific research is only beginning to document. These traditional perspectives emphasize the interconnectedness of all watershed species, viewing platypuses not as isolated conservation targets, but as indicators of overall ecosystem health. Their presence signals clean water, stable banks, and abundant prey populations that support dozens of other species. Their absence warns of systemic problems that threaten the entire aquatic community. Some indigenous communities begin collaborative management programs that combine traditional knowledge with modern conservation techniques. These partnerships focus on restoring natural fire regimes that maintain riparian vegetation, removing invasive species that disrupt food webs, and protecting culturally significant sites that often coincide with critical habitat areas. The economic arguments for platypus conservation gradually gain traction as the costs of environmental degradation become apparent. Water treatment facilities require increasingly expensive technology to remove agricultural chemicals and urban pollutants from drinking water supplies. Flood damages increase as natural wetlands that once absorbed excess water are destroyed or degraded. Tourism industries that depend on clean rivers and unique wildlife face declining revenues. Some corporations begin incorporating ecosystem services into their accounting systems, recognizing the economic value of healthy watersheds for water filtration, flood control, and carbon sequestration. These companies invest in habitat restoration as a cost-effective alternative to technological solutions for environmental problems. Green bonds and other financial instruments channel private investment toward conservation projects that provide measurable environmental benefits. Payment for ecosystem services. Programs compensate landowners for maintaining or restoring habitat that supports platypus populations. These market-based approaches supplement traditional regulatory protections with economic incentives for conservation, but economic solutions face their own limitations. The benefits of healthy ecosystems are often difficult to quantify and accrue over long time periods, while the costs of conservation are immediate and highly visible. Short-term thinking, driven by quarterly profit reports, conflicts with the generational perspective necessary for species conservation. Political systems struggle to address environmental problems that cross jurisdictional boundaries and require sustained commitment beyond electoral cycles. International cooperation remains limited despite the global nature of climate change and pollution issues that threaten aquatic ecosystems worldwide. The platypus becomes a symbol in broader debates about humanity's relationship with the natural world. Environmentalists point to their plight as evidence that current economic systems are fundamentally incompatible with ecological sustainability. Industry advocates argue that conservation efforts must be balanced against human needs for economic development and job creation. Media coverage oscillates between crisis narratives that emphasize imminent extinction and success stories that highlight conservation achievements. The public receives mixed messages about the urgency of the situation and the effectiveness of current response efforts. Poll numbers show broad support for environmental protection in principle, but resistance to specific measures that might affect individual lifestyles or economic interests. Young activists, inspired by growing awareness of environmental crisis, organize protests and advocacy campaigns demanding more aggressive action to protect remaining habitat. They argue that previous generations have failed to address known problems and that their future depends on immediate, transformative changes in how society relates to natural systems. Some of these activists focus specifically on platypus conservation, using the species' unique characteristics to capture public attention and generate support for broader environmental protection measures. Social media campaigns feature compelling images of platypuses in their natural habitat, alongside stark documentation of the threats they face. The contrast between the species' remarkable evolutionary achievements and their current vulnerability resonates with audiences who might otherwise ignore environmental issues. The story of creatures that survived the extinction of dinosaurs, now threatened by plastic pollution and agricultural runoff, provides a powerful narrative about human responsibility for environmental stewardship. But activism alone cannot address the systemic drivers of environmental degradation. Technical solutions require massive investments in clean energy, sustainable agriculture, and green infrastructure. Behavioral changes depend on shifts in cultural values and individual choices that occur slowly and unevenly across different populations. Scientific research continues to refine understanding of what platypuses need to survive and reproduce successfully. New technologies allow researchers to monitor individuals and populations with minimal disturbance, providing detailed data on habitat use, movement patterns, and reproductive success. This information guides increasingly sophisticated conservation strategies. Genetic rescue programs attempt to maintain diversity in isolated populations by carefully managed breeding between different groups. Cryopreservation techniques preserve genetic material from individuals in declining populations, creating the possibility of future restoration efforts, even if current conservation measures fail. Artificial intelligence systems analyze vast datasets to identify optimal locations for habitat restoration and predict the likely success of different conservation strategies. Machine learning algorithms process satellite imagery to monitor habitat quality changes across entire watersheds, alerting managers to emerging threats before they become critical. But technology cannot substitute for the fundamental requirement of clean, flowing water and intact riparian ecosystems. All the monitoring and genetic management in the world cannot save populations if their basic habitat needs are not met. The species' survival ultimately depends on maintaining or restoring the ecological conditions that sustained them for millions of years. Some scientists argue for more radical interventions, including captive breeding programs that could maintain genetic diversity even if wild populations collapse. Others advocate for assisted migration, moving populations from degraded habitats to areas with better long-term prospects for survival. These proposals generate intense debate within the conservation community. Some argue that such interventions represent humanity's responsibility to repair the damage caused by industrial development. Others contend that technological fixes distract from the more fundamental need to address the root causes of environmental degradation. The debate reflects deeper philosophical questions about the appropriate relationship between human societies and natural systems. Should conservation efforts focus on preserving wilderness areas free from human influence, or should they embrace more active management that acknowledges the reality of human dominance over most landscapes? Platypuses themselves remain oblivious to these debates, responding only to the immediate conditions they encounter in their daily struggle for survival. In the places where habitat quality remains adequate, they continue to hunt, breed, and raise their young according to patterns established over millions of years of evolution. Each successful reproduction represents a small victory against the forces threatening their extinction. Every young platypus that survives to establish its own territory carries forward genetic heritage that connects it to ancestors who swam in rivers when Australia was part of Gondwana. Their persistence demonstrates life's remarkable ability to adapt and endure even under challenging circumstances. But adaptation has limits, and the challenges facing platypuses today exceed anything their evolutionary history prepared them for. The speed and scale of environmental change driven by human activities outpaces the biological processes that allowed their ancestors to survive previous extinction events. The next decade will likely determine whether enough habitat can be preserved or restored to support viable populations through the remainder of this century. The decisions made in corporate boardrooms, legislative chambers, and individual households during this critical period will shape the future of one of evolution's most extraordinary experiments. Your species' fate hangs in the balance between human destructiveness and human creativity, between short-term thinking and long-term wisdom, between economic systems that treat nature as a commodity and worldviews that recognize the intrinsic value of biodiversity. The outcome remains unwritten, dependent on choices yet to be made by people who may never see a living platypus, but whose actions will determine whether future generations inherit a world where such remarkable creatures still exist. In the remaining strongholds where your species still persists, the ancient rhythms continue. Female platypuses still dig their breeding burrows in stable banks, still nurse their young with milk secreted through their skin, still teach them the skills necessary for survival in an aquatic world. Young males still disperse to establish their own territories, still learn to hunt using senses that remain among the most sophisticated in the animal kingdom. These continuing cycles represent both hope and vulnerability. Hope because they demonstrate the species' persistent vitality in suitable habitat, vulnerability because they depend on environmental conditions that become rarer with each passing year. The story of your species in the 21st century will be written by the intersection of their remarkable adaptations with humanity's capacity for environmental wisdom. The river where you died continues its flow toward the sea, carrying its burden of chemicals and memories past landscapes increasingly dominated by human infrastructure. But other rivers still run clean and cold from mountain sources, supporting the aquatic communities that your ancestors knew for millions of years. In these places, your story continues through others who share your extraordinary heritage, each one a living link to an evolutionary past that reaches back to the dawn of mammalian life on Earth. Whether that link will extend into the future depends on choices being made today in places far removed from any platypus burrow. The fate of your species has become intertwined with the broader question of whether human civilization can learn to live within the ecological limits of the planet that gave it birth. The story continues. Its ending yet to be written by forces larger than any individual creature, but ultimately shaped by the accumulated choices of countless individuals who may never fully understand the consequences of their actions for the remarkable animals that still swim in the world's remaining clean waters. Your legacy lives on in every platypus that survives to see another dawn, carrying forward the genetic heritage of millions of years of evolutionary innovation into an uncertain but not hopeless future. The seasons turn without ceremony, each one bringing subtle changes that few creatures notice or understand. In the headwater streams, where your species still clings to existence, young platypuses emerge from burrows carved into banks that have remained stable for decades. They slip into water that runs clear and cold, their bills already tingling with the electrical signatures of abundant prey moving through the shallows. These fortunate few inherit territories that still function according to ancient rules. The crayfish populations respond predictably to seasonal temperature changes. Native fish species migrate upstream to spawn in gravel beds that haven't been buried under agricultural sediment. Aquatic insects emerge in coordinated hatches that darken the evening sky with wings, their larvae providing reliable protein for growing platypuses learning to hunt. But even in these refuges, changes creep in like shadows, lengthening at sunset. Water temperatures climb by fractions of degrees each year, stressing species adapted to cooler conditions. Rainfall patterns shift subtly, creating dry spells that drop water levels below critical thresholds and floods that scour away the vegetation, holding riverbanks together. One young female, barely 2 years old, establishes her first territory in a pristine mountain stream where her grandmother once hunted. The water runs so clear she can see individual pebbles on the bottom, and her electroreception picks up the bioelectric chatter of a healthy aquatic ecosystem. Fish dart between submerged logs, crayfish scuttle across rocky ledges, and insect larvae cling to every available surface. Her hunting success rate exceeds anything recorded in degraded habitats downstream. She gains weight rapidly, her fur develops the lustrous sheen of perfect health, and her reproductive organs mature ahead of schedule. When breeding season arrives, males compete fiercely for the chance to mate with such a prime female. She chooses carefully, selecting partners whose own condition suggests superior genetic quality. Her first clutch produces 3 healthy young who emerge from their shells in a burrow dug into clay that hasn't been disturbed by human activity for generations. The tunnel slopes at the perfect angle to prevent flooding while maintaining optimal humidity levels. The nursery chamber provides exactly the right amount of space for growing bodies without wasting precious body heat. She feeds them milk that contains none of the chemical contaminants that plague their downstream cousins. Her own diet of clean fish and uncontaminated invertebrates translates into nutrition that supports rapid, healthy development. Her young grow faster and stronger than juveniles in compromised environments, their nervous systems developing the full sensitivity that makes their species such formidable hunters. When weaning time arrives, she introduces them to prey that still represents the full spectrum of aquatic biodiversity. They learn to distinguish between dozens of different electrical signatures, each one corresponding to a specific prey species with its own behavior patterns and nutritional value. Their education encompasses knowledge that has been lost from degraded ecosystems where simplified food webs offer fewer learning opportunities. The young disperse into a landscape where suitable territories still exist for those skilled enough to claim them. Competition remains intense, but it's the healthy competition between well-fed animals rather than the desperate struggles of creatures facing starvation in depleted habitats. Territorial boundaries shift based on ability and determination rather than simple scarcity of resources. This mountain population represents what your species once was throughout its range: abundant, healthy, and perfectly adapted to their environment. Their success demonstrates that the fundamental biology of platypuses remains sound. Given adequate habitat, they thrive with the same vigor that carried their ancestors through millions of years of environmental challenges. But their isolation grows more complete with each passing year. Development pressures push closer to the protected watersheds that shelter these populations. Road construction fragments the landscape, creating barriers to movement that didn't exist when your grandmother was young. Mining operations probe the headwaters, seeking mineral deposits that lie beneath the gravel beds where native fish spawn. Climate change threatens even the most pristine habitats. Computer models predict temperature increases that will exceed the tolerance ranges of cold water species throughout the mountain streams. Shifting precipitation patterns could transform reliable waterways into seasonal torrents, followed by months long droughts that no aquatic ecosystem could survive. The genetic analysis reveals troubling trends even in these healthy populations. Isolation has begun to reduce genetic diversity as individuals can no longer move freely between different watersheds. Inbreeding coefficients rise slowly but steadily, increasing the risk that beneficial genetic variants will be lost through random chance. Scientists propose wildlife corridors that could reconnect isolated populations, but the corridors would need to cross landscapes increasingly dominated by human infrastructure. Urban planners incorporate these proposals into long-term development strategies, but implementation faces constant pressure from economic interests that view undeveloped land as wasted opportunity. Some progress occurs through unexpected partnerships. A mining company seeking to improve its environmental reputation funds the construction of fish ladders that allow movement between previously isolated stream sections. The ladders work for fish, but platypuses prove reluctant to use artificial structures, preferring to travel overland between water bodies. Researchers develop new designs specifically for platypus movement, creating gentler slopes and more natural materials that better accommodate their unique locomotion patterns. The modified structures show promise in laboratory tests, but field trials reveal the complexity of behavior patterns that evolved over millions of years and resist simple technological solutions. Agricultural interests begin adopting practices that reduce chemical runoff, driven partly by environmental regulations and partly by consumer demand for sustainably produced food. Buffer strips of native vegetation along waterways filter pollutants before they reach streams, while reduced pesticide applications lower the toxic load carried by rainfall and groundwater. These improvements show measurable benefits within a few seasons. Water quality monitoring stations record declining concentrations of agricultural chemicals. Fish populations rebound in streams where pollution loads drop below critical thresholds. Some platypus populations expand their ranges slightly, recolonizing areas that had been abandoned due to poor water quality. But progress remains frustratingly slow compared to the rate of environmental degradation. For every stream section restored to health, others succumb to new sources of pollution or habitat destruction. Urban expansion continues to pave over wetlands and fill in waterways. Climate change accelerates regardless of local conservation efforts, driven by global emission patterns that dwarf any regional mitigation measures. The conservation community debates increasingly desperate measures. Captive breeding programs expand beyond their original research focus, preparing to maintain genetic diversity even if wild populations collapse entirely. Seed banks preserve genetic material from individuals in declining populations, creating the theoretical possibility of future restoration even after local extinctions occur. Assisted migration projects begin moving individuals from degraded habitats to areas with better long-term survival prospects. The relocations require careful planning to avoid introducing diseases or genetic variants that might disrupt established populations. Success rates vary widely, with some individuals adapting quickly to new environments, while others fail to establish territories or reproduce successfully. These interventions generate ethical debates about the appropriate role of human management in natural systems. Some argue that active intervention represents humanity's moral obligation to repair damage caused by industrial development. Others contend that such technological approaches treat symptoms rather than addressing the fundamental drivers of environmental degradation. Indigenous communities offer different perspectives based on traditional ecological knowledge systems that view humans as participants in natural processes rather than external managers of them. Their approaches emphasize working with natural systems rather than controlling them, seeking solutions that benefit entire ecosystems rather than focusing on individual species. Some collaborative management projects successfully integrate indigenous knowledge with modern conservation techniques. These partnerships restore natural fire regimes that maintain riparian vegetation, remove invasive species that disrupt food webs, and protect culturally significant sites that often coincide with critical habitat areas. The economic arguments for conservation evolve as the costs of environmental degradation become increasingly apparent. Water treatment facilities require more sophisticated and expensive technology to remove pollutants from drinking water supplies. Flood damages increase as natural wetlands that once absorbed excess water are destroyed or degraded. Tourism industries dependent on clean rivers and unique wildlife face declining revenues as environmental quality deteriorates. Corporate sustainability initiatives begin incorporating ecosystem services into business planning, recognizing the economic value of healthy watersheds for water filtration, flood control, and carbon sequestration. Some companies invest directly in habitat restoration as a cost-effective alternative to technological solutions for environmental challenges. Green financing mechanisms channel private investment toward conservation projects that provide measurable environmental benefits. Payment for ecosystem services programs compensate landowners for maintaining or restoring habitat that supports platypus populations. These market-based approaches supplement traditional regulatory protections with economic incentives for conservation action. But economic solutions face inherent limitations in addressing environmental problems that operate on different timescales than financial markets. The benefits of healthy ecosystems often accrue over decades or centuries, while investment decisions focus on quarterly returns. Long-term thinking necessary for species conservation conflicts with short-term pressure for immediate profits. Political systems struggle to address environmental challenges that cross jurisdictional boundaries and require sustained commitment beyond electoral cycles. International cooperation remains limited despite the global nature of climate change and pollution issues that threaten aquatic ecosystems worldwide. Environmental activism adapts to changing political and social conditions, using new technologies and communication strategies to build support for conservation measures. Social media campaigns leverage compelling imagery and personal stories to engage audiences who might otherwise ignore environmental issues. The unique characteristics of platypuses, their evolutionary history, remarkable adaptations, and current vulnerability provide powerful narratives for broader environmental advocacy. Young activists organize around the principle that their generation will inherit the consequences of current environmental decisions. They demand more aggressive action to address climate change and habitat destruction, arguing that gradual approaches have failed to match the scale and urgency of environmental challenges. Some focus specifically on aquatic ecosystem protection, recognizing that freshwater environments face disproportionate threats from human activities. They advocate for stronger pollution controls, dam removal programs, and watershed-scale planning that prioritizes ecosystem health over short-term economic gains. Educational initiatives reach increasingly diverse audiences through schools, community organizations, and online platforms. Citizen science projects engage volunteers in monitoring water quality and documenting wildlife populations. These programs build environmental awareness while generating valuable data that supports conservation planning and policy development. Museums and zoos develop exhibits that showcase the remarkable biology of platypuses while highlighting the environmental challenges they face. Interactive displays allow visitors to experience electroreception simulations and understand the complex sensory world that makes these creatures such effective hunters. Conservation messages integrated into these exhibits connect emotional engagement with actionable information about protecting aquatic habitats. Media coverage of environmental issues becomes more sophisticated as journalists develop expertise in translating scientific research for general audiences. Documentary films and television programs feature platypuses in their natural habitats, providing intimate portrayals of behavior and ecology that were impossible to capture with earlier technology. These productions reveal the complex social interactions and sophisticated problem-solving abilities that make platypuses far more than just evolutionary curiosities. Audiences see individuals learning to hunt, defending territories, and raising young in environments that require constant adaptation to changing conditions. But media attention also creates unrealistic expectations about conservation outcomes. Success stories emphasize dramatic recoveries and technological solutions, while the slow, difficult work of habitat restoration and pollution control receives less coverage. Public understanding of environmental issues becomes influenced by narratives that prioritize immediate, visible results over long-term, systemic changes. Scientific research continues expanding knowledge about platypus biology, behavior, and ecological requirements. New technologies allow researchers to study individuals and populations with minimal disturbance, providing detailed information about habitat use, movement patterns, and reproductive success. This research guides increasingly sophisticated conservation strategies tailored to specific regional conditions. Genetic studies reveal the evolutionary relationships between different populations and identify genetic variants that may provide adaptation to environmental changes. This information guides breeding management in both wild and captive populations, helping maintain genetic diversity that could prove crucial for future survival. Physiological research investigates how environmental stressors affect platypus health and reproduction. Studies of toxin accumulation, immune system function, and stress hormone levels provide early warning indicators of population health problems. This research helps identify emerging threats before they reach critical levels. Behavioral studies document how platypuses respond to environmental changes, revealing their capacity for adaptation within the constraints of their evolutionary heritage. Some populations show remarkable flexibility in hunting strategies and habitat use, while others remain more specialized and vulnerable to specific types of environmental degradation. Ecological research investigates the broader ecosystem relationships that support platypus populations. Food web studies identify the prey species that provide essential nutrition and the environmental conditions that support abundant prey populations. Habitat modeling predicts how climate change and land use changes will affect the availability of suitable environments. This expanding knowledge base informs conservation strategies that become more targeted and effective over time. Restoration projects incorporate detailed understanding of soil composition, vegetation requirements, and hydrological patterns necessary for creating viable platypus habitat. Management plans address the specific threats affecting different populations while building on their particular strengths and opportunities. But knowledge alone cannot overcome the fundamental challenges facing freshwater ecosystems throughout the world. Scientific understanding of what platypuses need to survive exists alongside continued degradation of the aquatic environments they depend on. Research documents the problems with increasing precision while solutions remain constrained by political and economic factors that operate outside the scientific sphere. The timeline for effective conservation action grows shorter as environmental changes accelerate. Climate models predict temperature increases that will exceed the tolerance ranges of many aquatic species within decades. Water extraction for human uses continues to reduce river flows below critical thresholds for reproduction and survival. Urban development fragments remaining habitat into isolated patches that cannot support viable populations over the long term. Agricultural intensification introduces new chemicals and management practices that stress aquatic ecosystems beyond their adaptive capacity. Global trade spreads invasive species that disrupt ecological relationships developed over millions of years. These multiple stressors interact in complex ways that make their combined effects difficult to predict or manage. Populations that might survive individual threats succumb to the cumulative impacts of multiple environmental changes occurring simultaneously. The resilience that carried platypuses through previous extinction events proves insufficient for challenges that exceed anything in their evolutionary experience. Yet in the places where conservation efforts succeed, remarkable recoveries demonstrate the potential for positive change. Streams cleared of pollution support, rebounding fish populations that provide abundant food for expanding platypus communities. Restored wetlands create habitat corridors that allow movement between previously isolated populations. Dam removal projects restore natural flow patterns that trigger reproductive behaviors and support the complex life cycles of aquatic prey species. Riparian restoration provides bank stability for burrow construction and shading that maintains optimal water temperatures. These successful projects require sustained commitment over many years and coordination between multiple agencies and stakeholders. They demonstrate that effective conservation is possible, but demands resources and political support that remain difficult to maintain over the timescales necessary for ecosystem recovery. The species that gave you life persists in scattered strongholds where dedicated people work to maintain the environmental conditions that evolution provided for free over millions of years. Their efforts represent both humanity's capacity for environmental stewardship and the enormous challenge of repairing damage that accumulated over centuries of industrial development. In the clean mountain streams where your genetic legacy continues, young platypuses still emerge from their burrows to begin the ancient journey of learning to survive in an aquatic world. Their success or failure will determine whether one of evolution's most remarkable experiments persists into the 22nd century or joins the growing list of species that could not adapt quickly enough to human-dominated landscapes. The story remains unfinished, its outcome dependent on choices yet to be made by people who may never see a living platypus, but whose decisions about energy use, consumption patterns, and political priorities will determine the fate of creatures that represent 65 million years of evolutionary innovation. Your individual journey from egg to death in a poisoned river becomes part of the larger narrative about humanity's relationship with the natural world that created and sustains all life on Earth. Whether that relationship evolves toward wisdom and restraint or continues on its current trajectory toward ecological collapse will be written in the survival or extinction of species like yours that have no voice in human affairs, but depend entirely on human choices for their continued existence. The waters flow onward, carrying both life and death, hope and despair, toward futures that remain unwritten but not predetermined. Your species' story reaches beyond individual lives like yours, extending into a future that hangs in the balance between human wisdom and human folly. The scattered populations that still persist carry within their cells the same genetic instructions that guided your first underwater hunt, the same electroreceptive capabilities that once made you a master of your river environment. In remote mountain valleys where development hasn't yet penetrated, platypus families continue the ancient rituals that sustained your ancestors through ice ages and continental drift. A female digs her breeding burrow into clay banks that haven't felt the vibration of heavy machinery. Her eggs develop in chambers carved according to architectural plans written in DNA, each tunnel angled precisely to prevent flooding while maintaining the humidity levels that ensure successful hatching. Her young emerge into water that still runs clear and cold, their bills already sensitive to the electrical fields generated by healthy prey populations. They learn to hunt in streams where crayfish populations follow seasonal patterns established over millions of years, where native fish species complete their life cycles without interference from concrete barriers or chemical contamination. But these refugees shrink with each passing season. The protected boundaries that once seemed permanent face constant pressure from economic interests that view undeveloped land as untapped potential. Mining companies probe the headwaters where the last healthy populations make their stand, seeking mineral deposits that lie beneath the gravel beds where native fish spawn. Road construction fragments the landscape between remaining habitat patches, creating barriers to movement that isolate populations and reduce genetic diversity. Urban sprawl creeps up mountain valleys, bringing with it the runoff and light pollution that stress nocturnal creatures adapted to pristine conditions. Climate change accelerates, regardless of local conservation efforts, driven by global emissions that dwarf any regional mitigation measures. Computer models predict temperature increases that will exceed the tolerance ranges of cold water species throughout your species' remaining strongholds. Weather patterns shift in ways that could transform reliable waterways into seasonal torrents, followed by devastating droughts. Yet human ingenuity also creates unexpected opportunities for recovery. Abandoned industrial sites become candidates for wetland restoration when their cleanup costs exceed their development value. Urban planners increasingly incorporate green infrastructure that provides wildlife corridors through developed landscapes. Agricultural practices slowly evolve toward methods that reduce chemical inputs and preserve riparian vegetation. From the moment you cracked open that leathery shell in your mother's burrow to your final breath beside a poisoned river, you lived as evolution intended, adapting, hunting, surviving against impossible odds. Your 9 years tell the story of a species that survived the dinosaurs but couldn't survive us. In the few places where your kind still persists, young platypuses emerge from their burrows each day, carrying forward 65 million years of evolutionary mastery. Whether they'll have a world worth inheriting depends on choices being made right now, far from any platypus burrow, by people who may never see one, but hold their fate in their hands. Here you can find the next video. Until then, see you soon